Hey, see, we talk. It's a conversation. Anyway, our guests are here in the studio and we'll be talking about public participation. We got into that a little bit earlier today, the first hour, where we're looking at all sorts of conversations happening this morning. And so help us out with that conversation this morning. Caroline Gaita is here. She's not a stranger to the room. It's good to have you. She's the Executive Director of Mzalendo Trust. Caroline, good morning.
Good morning. Happy to be back.
Good to see you.
It's been a while.
It has.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much for being here. Philip Nyakundi Gichana. All three of his names have been presented this morning. He's the Policy Director, Africa Global Financial Integrity. Thank you for being here this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. We're going to be talking this morning about strategic litigation against public participation, and we're going to be looking into that. But to welcome you properly, not just anyhow welcome. CT, of course, goes and he collects proverbs from around Africa, and he's gone to a beautiful island nation this week, and so he's going to tell us what the proverb is, and then you will tell us how you would interpret this proverb. The only assignment we'll give you today.
Okay.
Yes, the country is the Island Republic of Mauritius. We say island because we think Mauritius is just one island. Well, there are several islands. There's Rodriguez, there's the Aglega, and there's Brandon, rather Saint Brandon. I know most people didn't know this, but I'm sure they know what the capital is, isn't it?
Am I most people? Okay,
you are definitely most people who know it. So please tell us.
Pohiri.
Yes. It's written Louis, but it's pronounced Louis. The proverb, the cleverness of one alone is a shallow well that soon dries up.
Philip is taking notes.
He's even nodding.
So let's allow him take notes, and then we can ask Caroline what she thinks about this.
The cleverness of one alone
I did the same
is
thing.
a shallow well that soon dries up, right?
Freudian doesn't get more Freudian, does it?
Right?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Teamwork, solidarity, collectiveness. That's what comes to mind, that you can't do these things alone, and more apt this morning as we are talking about public participation. You cannot make legislation, you can't change policies without communal input into the things that you're doing.
Voila.
Yes.
Lands home. Philip, what about you?
Thank you.
Fully agree. Just to say that no one has the monopoly of all the wisdom, that even the most cleverest person in the room is that person who listens and also accommodates the views of what others are saying. In that way, you're able to even shape your ideas better.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
When you get a little bit from everybody, then I guess it all comes together and you're actually able to make it work. I think that gives us a fantastic opportunity to dovetail into our conversation for this morning. And I don't think it would come at a better time when we're looking at issues to do with public participation when it comes to how Kenyans, Africans will be governed and how their resources will be used. Can we start off with a very broad definition of what public participation is as you deal with, Mzalendo Trust, Caroline, and as we come back to how Philip also deals at the African Global Financial Integrity. When we talk about public participation, what are we talking about exactly?
I think for us, it's really simple. It's ensuring that citizen voices are on the decision-making table, that whether you're making policies, whether you're planning development projects for your county or for your ward, whether it's parliament that's making legislation, it's not legislation or development programs or policy development in a vacuum. It's ensuring that citizen voices count. It's also about ensuring responsiveness, because then if you have citizen priorities considered, then whatever you're coming up with, be it a law, be it a policy, be it a project, it means then it is responding to citizen needs. So, in summary, I would really say is citizen-centric kind of policy development, legislative development, project development that ensures that citizens are at the center of it. And as Kenyans, this is an inherent right that the Constitution has given us. It's one of the most transformative elements of our Constitution, and it's one that citizens should really take advantage of to inform how they are governed, to inform priorities that they deem fit for their different spaces, and to also hold those that they elect or appoint, those that are appointed, to account. Because if you are engaged, then you know what's going on, you know how your budgets are being used, you know how your priorities are being allocated, and therefore you can go back and say, this is not what we said, or this is how much money we allocated, and this is what you've done. It doesn't seem to meet that budget cost that you promised us at the last public participation forum. So citizen-centric, citizens at the center, citizens at the decision-making tables. Yes.
Okay. I mean, there is the effects of strategic lawsuits against public participation, which we'll be looking at today in detail.
Yes.
But even before we get into that properly, Philip, do we see right now, and let's just use Kenya obviously because we're here now, but then this can be extrapolated easily across the continent, but do we see that public participation is front and center when it comes to decisions that government is making covering the sovereignty of the people? Do we see this?
It has been a mixed bag when you talk about public participation in Kenya. That in the sense that you're looking at processes, policies and legislations that have been put in place properly that open up this space for public participation. As Carol has mentioned it, we have legislations all the way from the Constitution, Article 33, 34. You have access to information because then you cannot participate if you don't have the requisite information. We do have procedures you put through the standing orders in Parliament that encourage or provide space for public participation. But while all this is happening, the reality has been different. What we normally say, vitu kwa ground are different. You know, what people are saying is that while these spaces do exist, there are newer ways of dealing with those spaces and killing off those spaces so that they remain cosmetic. And the question that you ask, Carol, how we look at it, public participation, is an issue of transparency and accountability. At least us from GFI, we look at it and say that for every action our leaders take, they should be accountable to the public and the citizens who pay their salaries and who they owe the ultimate responsibility. When we look at one of the biggest issues we've been struggling as a country is an issue of corruption, and that is where we have the biggest challenge because from the corruption angle, we look at it from people who want to report, these issues. We look at people who want to speak about these issues and, have dialogues and what kind of actions they need to take in terms of interventions. But we are seeing that that is not happening properly, and newer ways are coming up to ensure that completely those kind of discourses do not happen. Yeah.
Okay, so when I looked at this the first time and just looking over yesterday, and I looked at SLAP and I said, okay, hold on a minute, how is this a good thing, right? Because we're looking at the effect of strategic lawsuits against public participation. I said, hold on a minute, this is not a good thing.
It's a bad thing.
It is, right?
It is a bad thing.
Okay.
It's a bad thing.
So I thought, okay, so what is SLAP? I mean, I know what a SLAP is, and many would say that actually it seems like it is a slap in the face of Kenyans, where we've established that there should be public participation, that there should be citizen-centric decision-making at the government level, at any level in the country. So when we look at SLAP, and I thought, well, actually it is. It's a slap in the face.
It's a slap.
It is a slap in the face. It's an affront to sovereignty. So what are we looking at here when we talk about the strategic lawsuits? Are we assuming that there are lawsuits that are designed to muzzle the voice of Kenyans?
Not just muzzling. I think whether it's the corrupt, and let me use the word corrupt, or those that are not purveyors of freedom of expression or good governance or accountability and transparency, they're always a step ahead of the rest of us. So whilst we are talking about public participation and ensuring responsive public participation, there are other emerging ways that on the face of it look very soft, that are hindering or impeding effective public participation. And SLAP is one of them. And SLAP, it takes many forms. It's judicial harassment of whistleblowers, of people that would facilitate public participation. It's intimidation, it's harassment against public watchdog organizations, individuals, journalists, civil society organizations. It is ensuring that it's premeditation against issues that may come up. So you're an investigative journalist. There's a case that you've been working on. You're about to release the reports through a media house like this one, and somebody quickly goes to court to stop you. But they don't just stop there. It's not just about going to court. It is a process that then ensures that you're held up in, protracted court cases for a long time that drain you financially. It is harassment for female journalists, as you see from the report. It could be sexual harassment, family intimidation. It's ensuring that as a media house, you spend so much time on legal recourse as you try to secure your journalists as opposed to reporting on the issues. But also more critically, it's ensuring that the news, the information, the investigation that you're carrying dies. Because if one media house is threatened, it then makes it almost impossible for other media houses, for other human rights defenders, for other civil society organizations to then stay on the issue. And that way, the issue dies. To say that SLAPs is not... it's not a new thing. In fact, I think from our research and from our reading, it's been there for almost 35 years. It's not peculiar to Kenya. In Kenya, it's actually coming up. But if you look at countries like, America and Europe, it's been an ongoing thing where if an issue is under investigation, the culprit quickly goes to court, secures orders that stop you from either talking, publishing, disseminating, or even investigating the issue at hand. And so for us, then, SLAP emerges as one of the biggest threats, not just to public participation, but also in terms of access to information, freedom of expression, and all the other rights that the Constitution, grants us. And for institutions such as ourselves, that, we are watchdogs, you need a space that allows you to do the work, allows you to disseminate your findings of the work that you have done
openly,
freely and openly. Allows you as an investigative journalist to be able to carry out your investigations and be able to disseminate your findings. SLAPs, unfortunately, work against that.
What are some examples, Philip, of a SLAP suit, for example, that we have seen in the country that would exemplify what Caroline is talking about?
In this country, we've seen a number of them. And as Carol has said, that it is something that has been here with us for a long time. And initially, we started from what we could call, criminal defamation. We had journalists who could be sued, who could be sued for what they have uttered, but criminally, so that they would be charged in court and charges, and they're jailed for it. But lucky for us is that I think a few years ago we had that issue of criminal defamation being declared unconstitutional by the courts. So that got out of our way, and we thank God for the courts on that. But we've seen a number and examples of where these powerful or the elite have used the courts also in a bad way. And an example is the case of John Gidongo, for example. His defamation case and how it was handled and the kind of damages that he was slapped. Those who are clearly a slap, just to show you that if you're going to, continue ranting or speaking about these issues of corruption, and then you be ready to face, heavy lawsuits where you'll be required to pay a lot of money. In the High Court, he was slapped with, I think, 27 million at the first instance. When this was appealed, it was reduced again to 10 million. you and I know that 10 million is no pocket change.
It's not.
You cannot just have that 10 million so that you can just deposit into the court and you keep, speaking about these issues. But even in recent scenarios, we have seen there was a group that was called Buyer Beware. I think everybody used to use it at some point. You owe me a few coins and you're not paying me. People would use that space so that, it's an easier way because people don't want to file cases they can't afford. But when they would put those issues there and lamentations, all that put there, they would get some justice. People would call you and tell you you are wrong, this is not the proper way. But that page was actually shut down, and the people who are behind the shutting of those cases, of course, we know are very powerful people, because some of them were governors then, some of them were potential governors, and they have been they got really threatened, the owners of those pages, and it was shut down. Recently, and sorry to speak about this, but it has to be spoken, the issue of the current governor Nairobi has come out, very strongly against some of the criticisms that are coming when people are asking about this transparency and accountability issues, about how money is being spent in the country. We have seen his lawyers dishing very strongly worded, demand letters. And true, I don't know, I went to a law school, but I remember when we were taught how to draft a demand letter, at least we were told not to put in monetary, they had quoted 100 or something million. How do you even arrive on that 100 million? Because that is something, an assessment that courts should, be talking about and assessing if your reputation was damaged, to what extent. So you don't say that I am worth this and you should pay me this for this. So I think there has been a number of them, and now they are coming out in a way that in so many groups we have with many activists, and they tell you that their members of parliament have gone to the DCI. So you find at the DCI, the member of parliament has complained that Philip spoke in a forum saying, I don't have a brain. So you are required to go to the DCI, write a statement. It's not a criminal issue, but they are using, those apparatus right now to ensure that this kind of voices do not come out.
Okay.
The bulwark that public participation seems to run into is something that we seem to have determined must be a growth industry in this country. It's called impunity. How exactly did we get here? I mean, you've been in this do-gooding business for some time. So you must have wondered and asked, how exactly did we get? Because we're not always here.
Yeah, that's... We haven't, but we've seen continuous disregard for the rule of law, for court orders, and I think it's been an incremental kind of step where in 2010 we were on a high, had the new constitution and everybody was doing good and trying to do what the constitution says. But over time, whether it is weekend legislation that made it soft, give those that would disregard the rule of law a soft landing on issues, whether it's court judgments, whether it's citizens not caring, we just seem to have given a free pass to issues of impunity. And that's why despite, for example, having very strong provisions around leadership and integrity, you will have people who have broken every rule in the book around leadership and integrity, but still hold public office, still get elected. If they don't get elected, they're appointed, and we cheer them on. So I would say it's been a mixed bag of weekend laws, court interpretations that don't give us very solid ground, for holding those that we should to account, citizens that don't seem to care. But overall, also, I think when you operate in a very, complicated environment where it's about daily survival, you would say that perhaps citizens are more concerned about their everyday existence to think or care so much about those that disregard the rule of law. So lots of corrective interventions needed there. But I would say that the framers and dreamers of the current constitution must be a disappointed lot, because a lot of the things that we provided in there have really been wasted. And just look at public participation. We've talked about how public participation has become very tokenistic, very meaningless, very selective. Currently you have citizens organizing, agonizing, getting together, for example, to speak about the finance bill. And we saw what happened last year, and it's our hope that this year perhaps there will be a listening voice. But what happens when citizens come out in droves, give out memoranda, and a bill is passed without any changes, or with changes that don't impact what the citizens were saying, and we move on as if nothing has happened? So that level of impunity, and because there are no consequences, to me, seems to be the biggest challenge that we face, that it should count for something, but it hasn't.
Why should citizens be concerned about any kind of litigation that comes against? I mean, people could just say, you know what, well, that's great, something is in court, but we can carry on. Why should it be a bother?
Citizens should be concerned. One, on the issue of courts are normally to be seen as arbiters, and fair arbiters while at it. When courts then turn oppressive, there's that trust that is broken between the citizens and that kind of that arm of government. We have always known that when the executive has gone rogue, we have always relied on the judiciary to right a few wrongs here and there. But when the judiciary then becomes an arbiter, an aider of these wrongs, then we should be scared, because then the citizen doesn't have anywhere to run to. I think in this country it is fair to say that at least the little bit trust that is left with the institutions, the judiciary enjoys the largest amount of trust, even with its own challenges. We know what Kenyans think about parliaments. We know the names they have called parliamentarians. We know that with the parliament, you're never sure about anything, whatever, even if it's an impeachment, you're never sure about the laws, the way they'll go. And citizens, don't trust. They have raised their issues, and they have very little trust on these other institutions. So for me, the courts remain an arbiter that should handle issues in a fair manner. When they punish an individual for speaking on a public interest issue, then it means, for example, you and me in our smaller spaces, that we should forever shut up. And that is the worst kind of society we'd want to have. It is worse than a dictatorship, because then the whole essence is that you don't speak up against any ills.
Do you think that we as a people are a trusting people and we trust leadership, or do you think, I'm speaking to the situation we currently find ourselves in, or do you think that we've given up?
I personally don't think we have given up. We've got a mixed way. We realize some of the problems and the issues we made. Some of us are questioning the choices that we made in the last election, and we are realizing that we did some few wrongs here as citizens, and we need to change. While people could be looking at it and saying, well, they can do whatever they want, at least now we are seeing also people coming out to say, no, you can't do all you want. And citizens are coming up and speaking about this. How well they use the ballot moment, I think, remains something for us to see. But I believe people are fed up with how things are going.
Don't you think that the ballot has been used quite well? If you look at the attrition rate of elected leaders, we do get rid of people we don't particularly want. So what is it? Because this we do. To some degree, by and large, if you look around the country, especially at the level of members of parliament, man, the attrition rate is high. Okay? But the question is that really our full mandate as citizens? Does our constitution only give us that particular leeway to handle these matters of oversight on the people who we've determined to represent us? Is it only the ballot, or is this something else we're supposed to do?
And maybe to your question, on the issue of attrition, perhaps the question is, yes, high attrition rate, but what are we replacing those that you have removed with? Because that's at the core of it. What is the quality of leadership that we are putting into office? So it's one thing to remove leadership, it's another to replace them with better leaders. And I don't think that's the issue.
So, do you think that we have in this debate of, because we seem clear about what we don't want.
Yes.
But are we clear about what we want?
If you look at the level of citizen engagement in the last 1 year or so, I think there's an increasing awareness of the sort of leadership that we want. Whether that translates into the ballot come the next election is the question, and what we should do in between to then ensure, because increasingly people are beginning to realize that choices have consequences, that it wasn't just a thing that was said in the past, that the type of leader you elect represents you. Of course, there are many other, interests in between, whether it's political party spaces, whether it's political party directives for parliament, whether it's the sort of citizen. There are issues we've raised, for example, around, money and its role in the sort of leadership that we are getting. So there's all this mixed bag. But at the core of it is citizens asking themselves, what sort of leaders do we want? When we get them, how do we hold them to account? When we have held them to account for 5 years, how do we make sure that we either punish or reward them in the next general election? And that has been a disconnect, if you ask me, because you will have citizens complaining about leadership. We've, as an institution, we do scorecards, we do accountability reports. With the civil society, you have all these reports that are done, whether it's on anti-corruption or corruption, whatever the case may be. But when it comes to the ballot, that doesn't count. And then we spend the next 5 years complaining about the issues that we raised before the elections. But coming back to SLAP, allow me to say something. SLAP is not just about chilling information. It's not just about saying you can't speak about this. It's also the harm element of it. Whether you're going to spend 5-10 years in a courtroom trying to defend yourself, whether your family is going to be intimidated, or if you're a female journalist or civil society lead or actor or just a public lead, you're going to be harassed, whether your family is intimidated, whether you have phone calls that threaten you with sexual harassment. It's harm. It's a harmful process. Whether it's a sort of money that almost makes you go bankrupt because you're in court. So the financial implications, whether it's on the organizations or on the individual, is very hefty. But most importantly, the muzzling of voices is something that every one of us should be concerned about, that it should not be a space that we allow to take root, because once we do, then all the constitutional gains around freedom of expression, of association, right to information, transparency and accountability, then we lose those. But also to say that in some cases, SLAP end up in loss of life. We've seen cases in other jurisdictions. I think we may remember the case of a Malta journalist who had been in a court case for almost 4 years around the Panama Papers, and eventually she was assassinated. Closer home, it's not sufficient to look at it from a national perspective. I think from our research, a lot of the cases that we saw actually touch on county governments. And you've seen bloggers get killed in county governments when they have tried to raise issues on accountability. I think we have 2 cases that we are aware of. We've seen a blogger die in Meru. We've seen another one die in Kisii. And increasingly, these journalists who work at local level, at community level, they are easily targeted. They can easily be identified. They don't have the protection that perhaps one would have from a big media house. And so they remain very vulnerable. And so in doing this research, we are not just hoping to raise awareness of this vice, but also trying to make sure that whether it's the Law Society, whether it's a media council, whether it's the Editors Guild, that they are putting in place mechanisms to protect journalists, to work with courts, to make sure that courts are not punitive, but remain defenders of truth, that voices are not muzzled, but also to make sure that, there's a level of solidarity that if, for example, one journalist from a certain media house is targeted, there should be a level of solidarity that allows the other media houses to run with the story, or to provide alternative voices to some of the issues that are being raised. So to say that as Kenyans, we should care, we should not let this take root, because once it does, then we may as well forget everything that we have in the Constitution, but also to say that it's a harmful practice, not just here but across the globe.
Sure, and I think that points to some of the solution-oriented things that we're talking about here, because Philip and Caroline, when we say that these things are happening, that we've already established that there is a threat to public participation. There's a threat to citizen-centric governance, essentially, and that we've seen the examples of how this happens, but then that's just part of it. So we see that these, in some cases, morbid things are happening. But then what ought to be done? Because it always does then seem as if something is going to be done, it gets thrown back at the citizenry to actually do something about it. Here we are talking about the Fourth Estate, media, protecting its people, working with the courts. What responsibility then goes back to governments who, from what you've cited, in some cases, are responsible for some of these things?
So these are a lot, and in our report we've made some recommendations. We, for example, made recommendations to the judiciary that there is need to create awareness within their ranks on the cost of slap suits, that they should be aware and be able to call out slap suits for what they are. We've seen in other jurisdictions like America where there are actually consequences of frivolous court cases that are brought to court to try and punish or to try and silence. So creating awareness, engagement with the judiciary, ensuring that judges magistrates can identify slaps for what they are. That's one of the recommendations we make. The second recommendation we make is, of course, to Parliament. There's need to review legislation to harmonize, to make sure that the loopholes, whether it's the Computer and Cyber Crimes Act that has been heavily cited in our report as one that's being misused, those loopholes are sealed through legislative amendments that make it impossible. Whether it's the Law Society of Kenya engaging its membership to make sure that then they are not the purveyors of slap suits, but instead are the bulwark and the defense mechanisms against slap suits. I think in terms of other duty bearers, it's really just making sure that there's the level of awareness across media. We've cited media a lot, and you see we've talked about the Media Council, the Editors Guild, Kenya Correspondents Association, and every media institutions, because from the report, journalists are heavily, I think from the research it was about 43 to 73%.
As targets?
As targets. Yeah. Because they're at the forefront. But we also have cases of human rights defenders. So whether you're then talking up to development partners to making sure that there is a level of support for human rights defenders, should they need a defense mechanism, should they need litigation? And finally, on the issue, I think the last 10 years you've seen a raft increase, in terms of public interest litigation. I think it's unprecedented, what we've seen in the recent past. And so this still remains a safety net where then you file counterclaims against slaps to make sure that then the voices of those that should be heard are not muzzled. Yeah. And all these recommendations are in our report.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to pick up from where Carol left it, if we look at and we intend to learn from what others are doing in terms of the issue of SLAP, those legislative reforms, for example, you talk about the US, look at the states that have done, anti-SLAP statutes. So what they learned, mostly you will realize there are states that, for example, are resource rich, and there was a lot of, these big mining companies, and they could see that these companies were using slaps to stop, environmental activists from speaking out, and they went back and had to put in a statute to ensure that an anti-slap statute in the states, the few states that are putting those laws, to ensure that if I have been sued for a case where I'm speaking on public interest issue, then I am allowed to just file a motion so that the burden of proof is put to the company to explain, for example, how then have I defamed or how have I offended their business rights. So that helps in a way that immediately the court can sniff out if the company cannot put tangible evidence to show, how my speaking out has affected them. Then, the court quickly is able to throw out this kind of this kind of suits. And as we speak, in the UK, for example, they have done already their public participation bill that also seeks to entrench anti-SLAPP, provisions in the UK, and they're saying we have noticed that a number of institutions are abusing, these litigation processes. They get the top law firms to sue some media houses, and in the UK it's actually been worse because media houses have actually shut down. And we pray that it doesn't get to that level in this country. Our defamation laws are actually an ordinance, if there is a word to use.
What do you mean?
An ordinance in the sense that we adopted these legislations since 1963 when we became, Kenya. And we've never come back to ask ourselves, how are these defamation laws? Are they serving us? Who are they serving?
Are you saying even with the 2010 constitution, these things were not amended?
No, there are a number of legislations that have yet to be amended with the Constitution 2010. So we have never, one of it is actually that Defamation Act. It has been amended in a very piecemeal way, and that is why it has been a fertile ground for the elites to exploit when they want to, silence people.
So the commission that was intended to work on the implementation of this constitution, are we therefore saying that perhaps the end of its tenure was premature?
The CIC, that one has always come out that we didn't release CIC properly. They should have actually ensured that we do a whole raft of reviews for all our statute books. So that did not happen. In a number of laws, you go to the Public Health Act. That is also another ordinance. You look at the kind of restrictions it has up to date. It's not consistent with the right to health as contained in our Constitution. So these are the laws that, for example, that Defamation Act, we should have gone back and ensured that we review that law so that it's consistent. This issue of anti-SLAPP could have been contained there.
Okay. So look, there are mechanisms that are in place with any functioning government. One would hope that there are mechanisms that are put in place to deal with the very matters that we're talking about today, right? When we talk about SLAPPs and we're looking at all of this background work that has been done to check and see, well, this is actually the state of things, and that there's litigation that would appear as though it's targeted so that we can muzzle the voice of public participation, isn't it? That's the establishment. Now, is it possible to say that, because like you said, public participation in many cases is a box somewhere in some report that must be ticked, where you're saying, have we filled the requirements for 1, 2, 3? One of those is, number 2 is public participation. Then we tick and we say yes. It's a suggestion, an ordinance, like you say. Can we expect that recommendations that Mzalendo Trust and GFI have come up with, or even things that would seem obvious to me and to you, that should then be incorporated, can they really happen if from the very genesis public participation itself is just a suggestion? I don't intend to do anything with it. Why would I protect you later?
We can hope. We can, and in a lot of the issues touching on public participation, I think the courts have emerged as the biggest defenders, whether you're looking at the issues that were raised around BBI or court cases that have been taken to question, the passage of certain legislation. Public participation always centers there. But of course, we have a challenge because 14 years since the promulgation of the Constitution, we don't have a national public participation law or a public participation policy. So that framework is missing. Counties have, of course, done county-based public participation laws, but whether those are effective also remains a question to be asked. So for us, we hope, and we can only hope that there will be respect, and there will be, improvements in, and that when the public participation law and policy are finally passed, that they will provide that framework, that threshold that must be met for us to say that public participation has been meaningful, has been inclusive, has been, diversified to include as many diverse voices as possible, has been effective, whether in terms of the resources that have been used to facilitate it or not, and most importantly, has led to is responsive to the voices that give their voices for that specific process. But in the meantime, institutions such as ours, citizens generally, media must keep calling out these issues for what they are. So where we identify gaps, we call them out and hope that either whether it's parliament or a county government that they will rectify, and where they don't, then we seek court intervention and hope that we will be supported in that element. I think we've always said that the aspirations of our constitutions were neither lofty or frivolous. So eventually we must get those gains. Whether it's an incremental, slow process, we will get there. And part of what some, works like this, research like this tries to do is to always keep reminding people that, yes, we've made progress, but a lot remains to be done. But most importantly, there are emerging threats that we cannot be blind to. We must be aware of, and therefore make sure that we don't backtrack on these gains for lack of knowledge or for lack of awareness. And we see that as a key role that we and other civil society organizations and other partners, have to continue playing to make sure that we reach this destination that seems like a very slow road, but
it happens.
But hopeful. Yeah.
I mean, we can't have enough of this conversation. Unfortunately, time now has run out, but we continue to have them and we continue to push. Carolyn Gaita, the Executive Director of Mzalendo Trust, and Philip Nyakundi Gichana, the Policy Director for Africa Global Financial Integrity, have been our guests this hour. Thank you for being with us here.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.